First contact fallacy. Research director Xylith watched the approaching human vessel through the observation dome of Helios Prime, her crystalline appendages shimmering with barely contained amusement. The ship looked absurdly robust for a diplomatic vessel, its hull reinforced with what her sensors identified as military-grade armor plating. "They armor everything," she remarked to lead researcher Nelox, who floated beside her in his containment field. "Even their civilian vessels. Fascinating primitive behavior, wouldn't you say?" Nelox's bioluminescent patterns flickered in what passed for laughter among his species. "Did you review their atmospheric requirements? They evolved breathing corrosive gases. Their homeworld is practically toxic by galactic standards." The Helios Prime Research Station represented the pinnacle of xenological studies in the Galactic Alliance. Its inhabitants prided themselves on their detached scientific observation of lesser species. Humans were their latest curiosity, a species that had somehow achieved spaceflight despite evolving on what the Alliance classified as a death world. "Their diplomatic delegation arrives in 3 cycles," Xylith announced to her assembled research team. "Remember, we must maintain professional decorum no matter how amusing their primitive behaviors may be. Save your observations for the private research channels." Dr. Venn, their chief xenobiologist, extended his sensory tendrils in interest. "I've been studying their medical data. They actually heal by growing new tissue. Their bodies deliberately trigger inflammation as a defense mechanism. It's practically barbaric. And yet somehow effective," Nelox noted. "They survive conditions that would kill most species. Did you know they actually continue functioning when parts of their skeletal structure fracture? They simply bind the broken pieces together and wait for them to fuse." The research team's reaction was a mixture of horror and fascination. They had evolved on worlds of perfect stability, careful atmospheric balance, minimal tectonic activity, regulated weather patterns. The idea of a species thriving in Earth's chaos was almost incomprehensible. The human ship, designated Indomitable Spirit, how typically dramatic, Xylith thought, began its final approach. Its course corrections were unnecessarily precise, burning excess fuel for redundant safety measures. The station's AI could have guided them in with a fraction of the energy expenditure. "They're requesting permission to dock," the station's AI announced. "They've also submitted 17 questions about our emergency protocols and containment procedures." Xylith's crystalline form sparkled with mirth. "Grant them access to the standard safety briefings. That should satisfy their primitive survival instincts." "They've already reviewed those," the AI replied. "They're requesting specific details about our backup systems, emergency power generation, and evacuation procedures." "Typical Death Worlder paranoia," Nelox commented. "They probably sleep with weapons under their pillows. If only they knew how right they were." The human delegation emerged from their ship with perfect military precision, though they were supposedly scientists and diplomats. Their environmental suits were clearly designed for combat as much as protection. Leading them was Commander Victoria Harrison, her movements displaying the fluid grace of a trained predator despite her attempts to appear diplomatic. "Welcome to Helios Prime," Xylith announced through the Universal Translator. "We are honored to have you participate in our evolutionary studies program." "Thank you for having us," Harrison replied with what the translator identified as carefully measured politeness. "We look forward to contributing to galactic scientific knowledge." As the humans were led to their quarters, Dr. Venn noted how they constantly scanned their surroundings, checked sight lines, and memorized the location of every door and maintenance access panel they passed. He documented it as further evidence of their species' inability to feel secure in controlled environments. None of the Helios Prime staff noticed the slight smile on Harrison's face as she observed their most secure containment level. None of them recognized the look of someone calculating exactly how long their perfect systems would last in a real crisis. They would learn soon enough. Deep in Containment Chamber 217, behind supposedly impenetrable force fields, something stirred. The humans weren't the only deadly predator on the station, but they were the only ones who understood just how inadequate the containment protocols truly were. The Helios Prime staff's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating humanity's strength or intelligence. Their greatest mistake was assuming that surviving a death world meant simply enduring it. They never considered that humanity hadn't just survived their world, they had conquered it. And they had done so by becoming something far more dangerous than any natural predator. They were about to learn the difference between a species that evolved on a death world and a species that made the death world fear them instead. Calculated chaos. The first warning sign wasn't an alarm, it was the smell. While the station's sophisticated sensors monitored radiation, pressure, and 1,000 other variables, they weren't calibrated for the primitive chemical markers that every human on board instantly recognized, the scent of an apex predator. Commander Harrison was halfway through her routine equipment check when her nostrils flared. "Dr. Reeves," she called to the expedition's xenobiologist, "are you getting that?" "Ammonia-based pheromones," Reeves confirmed, already sealing her research tablet in its hardened case. "Similar to what you'd get from an Earth-based big cat, but more complex. Something's marking its territory." "Impossible," Research Director Xylith declared when Harrison contacted the station's command center. "Our containment systems are perfect. You're obviously experiencing sensory hallucinations due to the stress of space travel." Harrison's reply was cut off by a sound that made every human's combat instincts surge to full alertness, the scrape of claws on metal, coming from inside the ventilation system. "Station AI," Harrison barked, "full scan of containment level 217. Now. I'm afraid I cannot authorize that without proper research protocols." The AI began. "Override code Harrison Echo 71, Harrison interrupted. Emergency protocols initiated." The AI paused, processing the override command that Harrison had quietly inserted into its systems during their arrival inspection. "Scan complete. Containment chamber 217 is empty." Xylith's crystalline form pulsed with alarm. "That's not possible. Our containment fields are generated by quantum-locked singularity drives." "Nothing can." "Your containment fields," Reeves interrupted, already pulling up station schematics on her tablet, "are calibrated for energy signatures." "But your specimen isn't energy-based, is it?" "It's a silicon-based life form that can alter its molecular density." The research team's stunned silence was all the confirmation they needed. "You kept a metamorphic predator behind an energy barrier?" Lieutenant Walsh, their security specialist, asked in disbelief. "Without physical containment backup?" "The barriers were rated 4. Nelox began. "Theory versus practice," Harrison cut him off, her team already moving with practiced efficiency. "Walsh, get our gear. Reeves, I need everything they have on this creature's hunting patterns. The rest of you, start evacuating non-essential personnel to the emergency shelters." "Now wait just a moment," Xylith protested. "You can't simply take command of my station. We have procedures." The lights went out. In the darkness, Harrison's smile was barely visible. "Your procedures just failed, Director. Now we do this our way." Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the corridors in red. Through the station's internal sensors, the research team watched in fascination as the humans transformed. Gone was any pretense of diplomatic niceties. Their movements became fluid, predatory, a demonstration of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. "The specimen," Dr. Venn reported, his sensory tendrils quivering, "it's displaying unprecedented behavioral patterns. The containment breach appears to have triggered some kind of hunting protocol." "Not hunting," Harrison corrected, checking the charge on what was definitely not standard scientific equipment. "It's establishing territory. This is its hunting ground now. Or at least, it thinks it is." The humans moved through the station with unsettling precision, setting up choke points and fallback positions. Their supposedly diplomatic equipment cases revealed an arsenal that made the research team question every assumption about proper scientific protocols. "You brought weapons onto a research station?" Xylith demanded. "We brought tools," Harrison replied, "for dealing with exactly this kind of situation. Your containment was guaranteed to fail, we saw that within 10 minutes of arriving. The only question was when." A roar echoed through the station's superstructure, a sound engineered by evolution to freeze prey in place. The research team's various appendages went rigid with instinctive terror. The humans smiled. That, Reeves said, adjusting something on her tablet, was a challenge. "It's claiming the station as its territory." "Confident," Walsh observed, "for something that's never met a human before." Harrison's expression shifted to something ancient, something that preceded civilization, the look of a predator accepting a challenge. "Let's go introduce ourselves properly." Predator's Paradox. The silicon-based creature moved through Helios Prime's maintenance tunnels like liquid metal, its crystalline structure reflecting the emergency lighting in mesmerizing patterns. It had never encountered prey that didn't flee. The human's behavior violated every predatory instinct it possessed. Dr. Reeves studied the creature's movement patterns on her tablet, her expression showing professional fascination rather than fear. "The crystalline matrix is adapting to each surface it touches," she reported. "It's learning the station's structural composition." "Smart," Harrison commented, checking the modified scanner she'd pulled from their equipment. "But not smart enough. It's following standard ambush predator patterns, mapping terrain, identifying choke points, establishing multiple retreat routes." The research team huddled in the station's command center, watching through security feeds as their perfect containment protocols crumbled. Dr. Ven's sensory tendrils coiled in distress as he observed the human's methodical response to the crisis. "You're treating this like a military operation," he protested. "This is a scientific facility." "Everything's military when you evolve on Earth," Walsh replied, setting up what looked suspiciously like targeting sensors. "You either learn to treat every situation as potentially lethal, or your species doesn't survive long enough to reach the stars." The creature's roar echoed through the station again, closer this time. The research team's universal translators struggled to interpret the sound, but the human's expressions shifted in perfect synchronization, recognition, analysis, response. "It's using subsonic frequencies," Reeves noted. "Trying to trigger panic responses in prey nervous systems. Fascinating adaptation. Won't work on us," Harrison said. "Earth's predators tried that trick millions of years ago. We learned to use those sounds as targeting data instead." The station AI's voice carried an unfamiliar edge of concern. "The specimen is attempting to access environmental controls through damaged maintenance panels. Its crystalline structure appears capable of interfacing with our systems." "Of course it can," Walsh muttered. "Because keeping a techno-organic predator behind only energy barriers wasn't enough of a mistake." Harrison's team moved through the station like water flowing around obstacles, their movements demonstrating an efficiency that made the research team's previous studies of human behavior seem hopelessly naive. They weren't just responding to the crisis, they were reshaping the environment itself, turning the station's sophisticated systems into weapons. "Rerouting power from non-essential systems," Lieutenant Walsh announced, fingers dancing across his modified console. "Creating temperature gradients to herd it away from civilian areas." "You can't do that," Xylith protested. "The thermal stress could damage our sensitive equipment." "Your equipment will survive," Harrison replied without looking up from her tactical display. "Unlike your station's population if that thing reaches the residential sectors." The creature, sensing the changing environmental conditions, adapted its hunting strategy. It began using the station's communication systems to broadcast its hunting calls through multiple sectors simultaneously, trying to confuse its prey's directional senses. The humans laughed. It thinks we're still using sound to track it, Reeves said, adjusting her sensors. It hasn't realized we're following its electromagnetic signature. The crystalline structure may be adaptive, but it can't hide the energy it's using to interface with the station's systems. Through the security feeds, the research team watched as the humans systematically eliminated the creature's advantages. They used their understanding of predatory psychology to predict its movements, their technological expertise to counter its adaptive capabilities, and their evolutionary experience to stay 3 steps ahead of its hunting strategies. Notice, Harrison explained, marking another tactical point on her display, how it keeps returning to vertically oriented spaces. Classic climbing predator behavior. It's trying to maintain a height advantage. But you're not letting it, Dr. Venn observed, his scientific curiosity temporarily overriding his fear. We evolved throwing spears at predators in trees, Walsh replied, calibrating another sensor array. Vertical advantage stopped working against humans around the time we invented gravity. The creature, increasingly frustrated by prey that refused to behave like prey, made its first serious mistake. It attempted to cut through a maintenance shaft that the humans had deliberately left open, not realizing they had transformed the passage into a sophisticated trap. Now, Harrison commanded. Walsh activated his modified controls, and suddenly the maintenance shaft's environmental systems went into overdrive. The temperature plummeted, the air pressure shifted, and the creature found its adaptive capabilities working against it as its crystalline structure began to respond to the changing conditions automatically. Fascinating, Reeves commented, monitoring the creature's reactions. Its molecular reorganization process can't keep up with multiple simultaneous environmental changes. It's literally fighting itself. The creature screamed, a sound of frustration and dawning fear. It had never encountered prey that could turn its own adaptations into vulnerabilities. That, Harrison said, her smile carrying echoes of ancient hunts on Earth's savannas, is the sound of a predator learning it's not at the top of the food chain anymore. The research team watched in stunned silence as their supposedly primitive research subjects demonstrated exactly why Earth's natural predators had learned to fear the soft, tool-using apes that had emerged from the evolutionary crucible of their death world. They weren't just survivors. They were the ultimate outcome of an evolutionary arms race that had forged them into something unprecedented in the galaxy, a species that had turned adversity itself into an advantage. And they were just getting started. Evolution's edge. Tell me, Director Xylith, Commander Harrison asked as her team prepared their final trap, did you ever wonder why humans developed such complex social structures? The crystalline researchers' form pulsed with confusion at the seemingly random question. Through the command center's displays, they watched the silicon-based creature attempting to recover from its encounter in the maintenance shaft. Your species evolved pack behaviors to compensate for physical inadequacies, Xylith replied, her tone suggesting this was elementary xenobiology. Harrison smiled, the expression making several of the alien researchers unconsciously retract their sensory appendages. We didn't develop social structures because we were weak. We developed them because we learned that hunting in groups let us take down prey many times our size. Coordinated pack hunting, Dr. Reeves added, finalizing the calibrations on her modified sensors. It's not just about numbers. It's about turning multiple perspectives into a single, unified strategy. The creature had retreated to the lower engineering decks, where the station's power distribution networks created a maze of electromagnetic interference. It was adapting its crystalline structure to match the ambient energy patterns, attempting to become invisible to the humans' tracking systems. Clever, Walsh commented, watching the energy signatures shift. It's learning. Starting to understand what it's dealing with. Too late, Harrison replied. She turned to the research team. You're about to witness something that made Earth's apex predators evolve fear as a survival trait, humans hunting as a coordinated unit. The station's AI spoke up, its tone carrying an unfamiliar note of respect. Commander, the creature is attempting to override local security protocols. Its crystalline structure appears capable of more sophisticated system integration than our records indicated. Of course it is, Harrison said. Because keeping a technologically adaptive predator in a facility run by computer systems made perfect sense. Dr. Ven's sensory tendrils coiled in embarrassment. Our containment protocols were designed by people who never had to outsmart something trying to eat them, Walsh finished, checking his modified equipment. Theory versus practice, remember? The humans moved through the station's corridors with practiced efficiency, each team member automatically covering angles and approaches without need for communication. The research team watched in fascination as their supposedly primitive subjects demonstrated hunting behaviors that made their previous studies seem hopelessly inadequate. Notice, Reeves explained, her scientific enthusiasm undiminished by the danger, how we're not just tracking it. We're reading its psychological state through its behavior patterns. Every move it makes tells us something about what it's thinking. The creature, growing desperate as its usual hunting strategies failed, attempted to turn the station's environmental systems against its pursuers. Temperature controls went haywire, pressure systems fluctuated, and lighting systems strobed in patterns designed to disorient prey. The humans adapted instantly, their responses showing generations of evolutionary programming. Environmental manipulation, Harrison noted, almost appreciatively. It's trying to recreate the conditions it would use to disorient prey in its natural habitat. Ironic, Walsh added, adjusting his equipment to compensate. Considering that's exactly what we did to it in the maintenance shaft. Through the security feeds, the research team watched as the humans systematically neutralized each of the creature's defensive attempts. They weren't just countering its strategies, they were forcing it to expend energy and resources, driving it toward exhaustion with an efficiency that spoke of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. "You're wearing it down," Dr. Venn observed, his scientific curiosity temporarily overcoming his terror. Persistence hunting, Reeves confirmed. One of humanity's oldest hunting strategies. We may not be the fastest or strongest, but we can outlast almost anything. Our prey eventually makes mistakes from exhaustion. The creature, its options dwindling, attempted one final desperate gambit. It began using its crystalline structure to transmit complex energy patterns through the station systems, not just interfacing with them, but attempting to rewrite their basic protocols. It's trying to turn the entire station into an extension of itself, Xylith realized, her form flickering with alarm. Harrison's smile turned predatory. That's exactly what we wanted it to do. The human's trap was elegant in its simplicity. While the creature had been focusing on evading their pursuit, they had been systematically modifying the station's power distribution network. When the creature attempted to fully integrate with the station systems, it found itself caught in a web of carefully calibrated energy frequencies. The thing about adaptive predators, Harrison explained as the creature's crystalline structure began to lock up, caught between conflicting evolutionary imperatives, is that they can't stop themselves from adapting. Even when adaptation is exactly what will get them caught. The research team watched in stunned silence as their supposedly primitive research subjects demonstrated exactly why Earth's evolutionary crucible had produced something unprecedented in the galaxy, a species that had turned intelligence itself into a predatory trait. The hunt was entering its final phase, but the biggest revelations about humanity's true nature were yet to come. Nature's nightmare. The creature's final transformation was both beautiful and terrifying. Its crystalline structure blazed with captured energy as it fought against the human's trap, refracting emergency lighting into kaleidoscopic patterns across the station's walls. In its desperation, it had become a living artwork of evolutionary adaptation pushed to its limits. Remarkable, Dr. Reeves breathed, her scientific detachment momentarily overtaken by genuine awe. Its entire molecular structure is oscillating between different states, trying to find a configuration that will let it escape. Through the command center's displays, Director Xylith and her research team watched as their perfect containment specimen demonstrated exactly why keeping it behind mere energy barriers had been so catastrophically naive. The creature wasn't just adapting anymore, it was evolving in real time, its crystalline form shifting through millions of years of potential evolutionary paths in minutes. "It's beautiful," Dr. Venn whispered, his sensory tendrils extending despite his fear. "The pure expression of adaptive survival." "It's desperate," Harrison corrected, her voice carrying the weight of evolutionary experience. "And desperate predators make mistakes." The creature's transformation accelerated, its crystalline structure beginning to resonate with the station's power grid in ways that made the AI's threat assessment protocols flash urgent warnings. It wasn't just trying to escape anymore, it was attempting to merge with the station's systems completely, to become something beyond its original form. "Fascinating," Reeves noted, monitoring the energy readings. "It's displaying emergent intelligence. The pressure of survival is literally forcing it to evolve new cognitive capabilities." "That's not evolution," Walsh said, making final adjustments to their modified equipment. "That's panic. It's realizing what humans figured out millions of years ago: raw adaptation isn't enough when you're fighting something that can think 3 steps ahead." The research team watched in stunned silence as their supposedly primitive research subjects demonstrated the true power of human hunting strategies. The humans hadn't just been pursuing the creature, they had been herding it through carefully orchestrated stages of escalating pressure, forcing it to expend more and more energy on increasingly desperate adaptations. "You see," Harrison explained, her tone carrying echoes of ancient wisdom, "the thing about pure biological adaptation is that it's reactive. But humans? We learn to be proactive. We don't just respond to threats, we anticipate them. We plan. We prepare." The creature, its options exhausted, made its final transformation. Its crystalline structure began to pulse with captured energy, turning itself into a living weapon. If it couldn't escape, it would take the station with it. The humans smiled. "They always try this," Walsh said, activating their final countermeasure. "The last desperate act of a predator that's never learned to lose." The trap they had laid was elegantly simple. While the creature had been focusing on the obvious threats, the humans' pursuit, their technology, their tactical maneuvers, they had been slowly adjusting the station's resonance frequencies. When the creature attempted its final, desperate energy surge, it found its own crystalline structure working against it. "The thing about adaptation," Reeves explained to the fascinated research team, "is that it works both ways. Every change creates new vulnerabilities. Every evolution opens new weaknesses. The trick isn't to adapt perfectly, it's to understand the limitations of adaptation itself." The creature's crystalline form began to stabilize, locked into a single configuration by carefully calibrated energy fields. Its final transformation wasn't an expression of power, but a demonstration of the fundamental truth that had made humanity the apex predators of their death world, the ability to turn an opponent's greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. "Containment achieved," the station AI announced, its tone carrying something that sounded almost like respect. Director Xylitha's crystalline form pulsed with a complex mixture of emotions as she watched the humans secure their captured prey. "You knew," she said finally. "From the moment you arrived, you knew our containment would fail." "We knew," Harrison confirmed, "because we understand something that your research missed. It's not just about surviving a death world. It's about understanding why it's a death world in the first place." The creature, now safely contained in a properly designed containment system, had learned what countless Earth predators had discovered before it, that humans hadn't just survived their evolutionary crucible. They had mastered it. "Your research asked the wrong questions," Reeves added, already documenting the incident for future study. "You wanted to know how we survived our death world. What you should have asked is why Earth's predators evolved fear as a survival trait." The station's research logs were extensively updated in the aftermath of what became known as the evolution incident. The term primitive species was quietly removed from all documentation referring to humans. New containment protocols were established, incorporating what the research team had learned about the true nature of humanity's capabilities. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy's scientific community viewed humans. They weren't just another species that had survived a death world. They were living proof that intelligence, preparation, and the ability to understand your prey's psychology were the deadliest adaptations of all. The creature remained in its new containment system, its crystalline structure occasionally shifting in response to remembered stimuli. And if the station's sensors sometimes detected slight spikes in its stress readings when humans passed by its enclosure, well, that was just another data point in the ongoing study of evolutionary psychology. After all, fear itself was just another adaptation, one that humanity had taught the galaxy's predators to evolve a very, very long time ago.